Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, our top stories this evening. Families of the 30 Britons who died in the Tunisia terror attack plan to sue tour operator TUI after a coroner ruled they were killed unlawfully. Sir Philip Green has agreed a £363 million cash settlement with the pensions regulator to plug the gap in the BHS pensions scheme. And the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has said Brexit critics should stop droning and moaning, but has admitted a free trade deal with the EU could take longer than 2 years. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour then, we'll see what's making the headlines with the editor of the Times Literary Supplement, Stig Abel, and Carol Malone, columnist and broadcaster. Welcome to you. Front pages then, first of all, the Financial Times leading with Sir Philip Green's BHS pensions payout. He's injected £363 million into the insolvent pension fund of the collapsed retail chain. Better late than never, Sir Philip's payout also features on the front of the Eye. It reports the move has largely been welcomed by the regulator and by MPs. The Times reports the deal will ensure that 19,000 BHS pensioners get better payouts than under the government scheme for failed companies. Pardoned and well done, Mr. Phil, is the Daily Mail's headline. In other news, the Metro has a story about a cancer surgeon who needlessly removed women's breasts to boost his earnings, a court has heard. That story also features in The Sun. It reports that women's lives were put at risk. The Telegraph leads with the planned changes to sex education in schools. In the biggest shake-up in nearly 2 decades, children as young as 4 will be given sex and relationship education. Millions of overweight Britons are at risk of developing 11 different types of cancer, according to the Daily Express. And The Guardian features a very striking image of the 30 Britons who were killed in 2015's attack on a beach resort in Tunisia. Their families have vowed to sue the tour operator. The Daily Star, at least my daughter was never left alone. A woman who faked the abduction of her daughter hits out at the mum of Madeleine McCann. So let's take a look in more detail, shall we, at some of those newspapers, and you want to start with Sir Philip Green. The bold £363 million in the Daily Mirror, one of a number of newspapers to lead on this story.
What a hero he is. It's a fine, heroic action on the part of Philip Green, probably still Sir Philip Green after all of this. I mean, he calls this a voluntary donation, a voluntary settling of accounts, and of course it's the very opposite of anything being voluntary. He was quite rightly pilloried for his role in taking vast sums out of money out of a company and then selling it for a quid to someone with no retail experience, leaving a shortfall of 500 odd million quid for people whose pensions were there in BHS. He settled 363 million of that, which is probably better than would have happened if he'd had everything squeezed out of him through the legal process.
But this is a lot of money we're talking about.
But has he settled? Well, he took out £400 million in dividends, so he's actually still 37 million quid up on the deal. So, but you know, he made it very clear. His quote was weird. He said he's going to pay up to 363 million. A lot of people are saying today, well, let's wait and see if he actually does that. But you know what? If you just look at social media and whatever, people still, even paying this, people aren't going to forgive him. People still want his knighthood. And I think, you know, he did himself no favours this summer, swanning around on the yachts, looking, you know, showing off his extravagance at a time when 19,000 people from BHS didn't know whether they were going to have a pension to live on. So I don't think, you know, even if he pays all this money back, I don't think people are going to forgive him for this, not ever. I think his reputation is in tatters.
And not with the Mail. It's interesting, the Mail, who really went for him.
They're wrong. He's not been pardoned.
But with the sort of anger and sort of mouth-frothing fervour that the Mail does really well. Sir Shifty, they called him. They really went for him. But well done, Sir Phil. They're willing to forgive the fact that this has taken months and months to achieve. They're willing to forgive the fact that he was willing, like I said, to take this money out of this company and leave people completely bereft and then belatedly come back with an all-right deal, a better deal than they would have got if he'd objected to it. So there is a tiny amount of credit there, but it seems extraordinary and some amazing politicking on the part of Sir Philip and his PR advisors to get at the Mail, to get into the Mail to enable this to happen. I'm really, really surprised.
I think it's very interesting.
Doesn't forgive anyone for anything.
I think it's interesting that Frank Field, the MP who led the fight against Philip Green and was, one of his main critics, said today, he said this doesn't end here. Now we're thinking it's all of it. He says it doesn't end here. He said, I think there are a lot of other issues which are not solved by this, which we will obviously be looking at, and the courts and everyone else will be. Now remember, at the start of all this, people were saying if he didn't pay up, they were going to have a very good, long, hard look at his businesses. And Frank Field is hinting here that maybe that's going to be the case.
But in terms of the pensions protection scheme, they've decided to park it now. This contribution is good enough for them. The pardon thing, I've moved on, as you can see, but the pardon thing in the Mail kind of alluded to the fact that he's a knight of the realm and whether people should still, as MP said, rid him of that. So
he won't be pardoned. I don't think he will be pardoned. Do we think he'll keep his knighthood?
I think he will now, because
Do you think so?
the great powering force for MPs, sort of MPs are interested in this, is the Daily Mail. And if the Daily Mail is rolling over to have its tummy tickled by Sir Philip Green, I can't see any brave MPs really pursuing.
But what that's saying is you can buy a knighthood, and that's not a very good message to be sent. No, don't. I mean,
of course you can buy a knighthood.
But to put that message out, saying I paid this and you get to keep the knighthood, it's not a great message to send.
I mean, the broader point is also he was seen as the unacceptable face of capitalism. That was the phrase that was used, and
he still is, I think.
Well, I think that's probably right, because although you could argue, at least, that there is the power of the select committee. He talks about this being voluntary. That's the thing that winds me up the most. This is a voluntary gift by him. This actually is testament to a certain extent of the power of the media, papers, or broadcasters like Sky News that got in his face, doorstepped him when he was.
And he's an avid viewer of this programme. He has phoned on a number of occasions.
I'm sure he has.
Evening.
He's obsessed. So Philip, well done. He's obsessed with his own personal image, which is the real reason this has happened. So, to a certain extent, instead of sort of praising the voluntary nature of this, we should pause to reflect that it was two select committees, it was newspapers, it was broadcasters, and it was public opinion saying this is not acceptable.
Does he care about BHS pensioners, or does he care about saving his reputation?
He cares about his image. He famously cares about it.
But it's interesting that I read one quote from someone today. It says, it's interesting that this has been settled, because it's been going on for months, it's been settled just before the end of the tax year. I wonder if it has any implications. Well,
probably enough to retain his knighthood is how the FT says. You have to remember, to be balanced to the avid viewer, Sir Philip Green, that actually you don't go into retailing not to make money. He's allowed to make money.
Of course, and he's done nothing illegal. This is not illegal. But whether it's it's improper.
He took 400 million quid in dividends.
Yes.
He sold the business for a pound to someone who had no experience of retail. So he took an institution upon which people's livelihoods were based. Lots of people's livelihoods were based. He took lots of money out, which is fair enough. It's capitalism.
You were just sticking up for him 2 minutes ago. No, you're not.
No, I'm not sticking up for him at all, because I think this nature that he can behave like that.
Would it have benefited him in the end if there had been a full investigation into the money he took out, the money he paid in when he bought it, into the whole dealings of British Home Stores? Maybe actually that all should have come out.
Or maybe it should, but he was clearly relatively comfortable with it not coming out, because he's chucked up 363 million. The pension regulator, which would have got less, so it's worth saying that if he'd have held out, they would have got less out of him. So he's given slightly more than the odds. But we're only in this situation because he was willing to go as far as he was, to take the money out, to leave people high and dry. And it's the least voluntary thing I've ever seen.
Do we think he did it out of the goodness of his heart, or because there's some deal being done?
Well, I just think the reputation of the fact he famously has a incredibly thin skin.
This will not save his reputation.
There's not a newspaper newsroom or broadcasting newsroom in the country who's not received a call from Philip Green.
And I thought we were special.
Sorry,
that's such a shame. Anyway,
this won't save his reputation.
You are special, but this is not an example of it.
We did have quite a few one night, anyway.
Did you?
Yes, we did. Not that that's a claim to fame. Anyway, should
Maybe
we move
he's calling
on?
now.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be about you. You just turned on him again, so there you go.
So, not all paedophiles should be sent to jail, says Police Chief. This in the Express. It was a time splash today, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I find this story incredible. I listened to this guy on the radio this morning, and he sounds very plausible, and it sounds, when he says it, the way he said it today, it sounds reasonable that, that if you have limited resources, you go after the bigger criminals. However, there are no circumstances ever in which someone who's looking at child porn online should be just let get on with it. The thing is that this is a bit like the argument, isn't it, about cannabis? Is it a gateway drug? Is it not? Does smoking cannabis lead to hard drugs? No. This is the same. Well, you might say that. I think it does. So people will say, normal people do not go online to look at child porn, and they do it for a very good reason, and I suspect it's because they might want to take the next step. So under no circumstances should policemen be saying it's okay to do this.
I've got a lot of sympathy, actually, with Carol's argument here. I mean, I do think there is an argument about policing generally, which he's right to talk about, which is you have a finite amount of resources. Yes. You can only go after a certain number of people, and you should target the people who are causing the most harm. In any criminal situation, there is a grade of harm that's being caused, and you should focus your attention more on the people causing the most harm. However, I think in the case of images of child abuse, and you shouldn't even really call it child pornography, because it's not pornography, they're abuse images. If you look at one, if you search one out, you are creating the market, which is creating a child being abused somewhere. And there is no, therefore, you're automatically as complicit as the person doing...
And what he says, if he's talking about limited resources here, he says, you know, that these lower-level offenders should be given counselling and rehabilitation. Yeah, because there's no money for that.
Let's take a look at what limited resources means in these circumstances. That there are more people with an interest in children in this country than places in jail. Yes. So what do you expect to do? Build more of them? Have one in every town?
Build more jails, put more people in jail.
Seriously?
Yes, I do seriously think that, because, you know, if you're talking about counsel and rehab, that costs money. We also know that...
But it's not, the limited resources simply that we do not have enough prison places.
So what do we do? We just let them serve child porn on the internet.
There's an argument you can make that people who are paedophiles have urges, and some of them wish to control those urges. Those people who have those urges...
And if you've ever talked to a paedophile, they say they can't control.
Well, no, but there is some evidence in some countries where you don't imprison, you rehabilitate. But I'm kind of, you know, anyone with kids, I think, would say the opposite.
Completely. And rehabilitation takes money.
We need to move on, but a related story is on the front page of the Telegraph. Sex and relationship counselling from a very young age now to be made compulsory.
I don't even think this is... Carol and I were talking about this before. I'm not even sure this is controversial anymore. I think probably 5 or 10 years ago, there'd be all sorts of sort of Colonel Blimps in the Telegraph saying, oh, we can't be having any of this, it's disgraceful. Actually, we are living in a culture that's hugely sexualised. Children have massive amount of access to online environments where sexualisation is clearly there. Kids need to learn about how the world works, and the world works in a very miserable, hostile way very often online, particularly, therefore, what is possibly wrong with giving kids the ability to...
I think a lot of parents will find the idea of this distasteful, but I don't actually think there's any choice. I think they would come to the conclusion at the end that better to teach them about it, have them be able to control it than, you know, than not.
OK. Still to come, it's on this paper, in fact, Pancake Day today. So what now is Theresa May giving up for Lent? Back in a moment. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me this evening, the editor of the Times Literary Supplement, Stig Abell, and Carol Malone, columnist and broadcaster. To the front page of The Guardian, then, the faces of the 30 British holidaymakers who were killed in Sousse. The inquest today ruling that they were unlawfully killed. Didn't take it quite as far as they wanted to, but some of them now planning to sue the travel company for, I guess, misleading travel advice, or...
Well, you know, I don't... you know, one has to feel for these families. I mean, devastating lives ruined forever, the survivors. But I'm not sure by doing... I don't know how far they're going to be able to go with this. The coroner quite clearly said today it was ruled that the law of neglect does not cover people who voluntarily go on holiday. So I don't quite know how this is going to pan out. And I don't know... I don't think that's going to work for them, you know. And the thing is, wherever you go on holiday, you know, people like us live and breathe news. We might not have chosen to go to somewhere where there'd been terror attacks. A lot of other people don't live and breathe the news in the way that we do, and so would go to a country without knowing what had gone on there previously. Now, I suspect that's the Foreign Office job to say if a country is not safe. And they didn't do that before Tunisia. They didn't say. There wasn't any warnings put out for people not to go. You know, a travel company can say what they like. I think Foreign Office warnings are the most important thing. And they didn't put it out. They have since. And I think probably the saddest thing in all of this now is that Tunisia as a tourist destination is finished. They used to have 84,000 people going there on holiday. Last year they had 5,000 people. The country is...
And that's the headline in the Times. Yeah, which massacre hit us hard.
But it's not a particularly, I think, great thing for a country. I mean, what comes out of this inquest is that the way the Tunisian police, the way the Tunisian security responded to this thing was completely and utterly inadequate. And they say, this former minister said, you lost 30 people, but the suffering is bigger for the Tunisian people. I think when you start getting into statements about moral equivalence of who's suffered more when 30 people are innocently murdered is a very ugly look for a country that, as Carol says, desperately wants to try and recoup its reputation and will probably never do so in our generation, in our lifetime, because people will recall the dangers.
Yes, and Russians are going there for completely bargain holidays, and the beaches are flooded with guards and security staff. But if they don't do anything, you don't have the confidence.
The coroner said today that even if they had been more hotel security, it just meant that more people might have been massacred on the beach than in the hotel. You know, a terrorist can go on a beach anywhere in the world, and it doesn't matter whether there's warnings there or not. They can choose a place, and they're going to choose a place in the future where there aren't any warnings out. And so this could happen any beach anywhere in the world, and I'm not sure who, if anyone, is to blame.
Well, as we saw in the attack in Nice and the security stuff on the beach in the south of France last year, certainly. Exactly. Bottom of the Telegraph, UKIP's Douglas Carswell, it says here, in secret talks to rejoin the Conservatives, because he's not very welcome at UKIP.
I love the fact that UKIP could have a backbencher revolt and they've only got one MP.
Yes.
Only UKIP could seriously seem to manage that level of organisational incompetence. I mean, Douglas Carswell's a very odd figure. He's not very UKIP-y. Obviously, he's a former Tory. He's fairly Tory.
He thought he was.
And indeed, as the Tories go more mainstream, Brexit, hardline in Europe, the Tory party he left was a David Cameron, soft, pro-European, let's hold it together by all being positive. The Tory party as is now, which I think is the real problem for Brexit, if you are an anti-immigration, hard Brexit inclined person in the north of England, in the south of England, you don't need to look for a new party in the form of UKIP. You don't need to be one of the 4 million who protest voted in the general election of 2015. If you want that party, the government is that party. The country is now your country. You've won. So if you're Douglas Carswell, then you might as well leave UKIP. I don't see the point of UKIP anymore. And he might well say, I've got a better chance of sticking
Carol,
with
we've only got 1 minute.
Right,
I'm going to try and squeeze in 2 very quick stories. One, which is right up Stig Street. Apologies, because I know you've just spoken. The Obamas, joint memoirs, bidding, topping $60 million. Wow.
Yeah, and they won't ever make it back. Publishers do this. This is vanity publishing. Publishers compete for these type of books. Blair, Cameron, Obama. Very, very, very rarely will they get their money back. They'll have to sell a phenomenal amount to get $60 million back. And
but worldwide market, you never
know. Obama's hugely popular. It's possible.
Yeah, and can they resell the rights?
Well, for $60 million, you'd expect to get rather more than just as basic right.
And final story in the bottom of the Telegraph once again. It's been very useful for us. In fact, it's very small, but I shall find it.
Crisps, Carol.
Okay.
Theresa May is going to give up crisps for Lent, and I know her pain here. She's going to give up salt and vinegar crisps because she loves them. Now, I feel her pain because I'm a Catholic and I used to give up sweets and chocolate for Lent.
You do it now?
I can't do it now, no, but I did do it. My mum used to make me do it. We both did it for the 6 weeks.
So you're not much of a Catholic now?
It was torture. No, I'm still a Catholic, but no, I still suffer the guilt.
Yeah. You're a Christ-eating Catholic.
I eat the chocolate.
Yeah.
We will leave you pondering what you're going to give up, if anything. Carol's clearly not. We'll see you at 11:30. Thank you very much indeed. Let's take a look at the weather.